Kipchoge is arguably the greatest marathoner who's ever lived. He's broken his own world record 2 times. He's run under 2 hours for the marathon in a controlled environment. He also won Tokyo, he won London, and he's won Berlin, but he's never run Boston. So he toes the line in 2023 to see what he can do on this iconic course. Early on in the race, Kipchoge takes off and he tucks himself mindfully into the pack. Now this is really where you want to be as an elite runner or any kind of competitive runner, because you're going to be able to draft off of the pack in front of you. You're going to save some energy and you're going to be able to also just psychologically relax, observe the other runners, evaluate the race, evaluate what's going on with your body. And Kipchoge is definitely very good at this. He likes to take the lead, but he does so with dominance, and he normally does so once he's able to establish and hold the lead all the way through the end. So everybody's running kind of conservative early on in the race. Now the weather at Boston is notorious for being either super hot, very cold and windy, ice storms, snow, and everywhere in between. And Kipchoge obviously wasn't able to train for any specific weather. Now on the day of the race, it's not great weather, but it's not horrible weather. It's raining just a little bit, and this really did impact the wheelchair division. But for the runners, at least it's a nice cool start. There's not a headwind. It is a little bit rainy and damp, which is going to slow the conditions down just a bit. And so through the early stages of the race, the entire pack, including Kipchoge, they're going pretty quick, but they're behind the course record pace. Now, this isn't unexpected, because when the course record was run, there was a strong tailwind that year that made the course very fast. And depending on the calculations that you use and depending on how long you were out on the course, the tailwind arguably cut off 5 or even 6 minutes from the elite runner's time, and much more if you were even further back in the pack. So this course record may stand indefinitely, at least until there's another year with a tailwind. So let's get back to the race here. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that any runner can make in Boston is not training for the hills. Even Kipchoge, who's running this race, says that Boston is made not in the hills, but down the hills. And he's exactly right, because early on in the race, the course goes downhill, and this has the tendency to really damage and shred a runner's quad muscles. So runners really do want to take it a little bit easy, even though it's downhill. And you see the elites doing this here. But we know what's coming later in the race, the infamous Heartbreak hill, followed by 5 downhill miles to the finish. Kipchoge has never actually run this race, not in training and not during a race. Of course, he's very fit and he's no stranger to running on hills. His legs are very well conditioned to go up and down hills. Now, Kipchoge is up against some fierce competition. He's running against Evans Chebet, who won last year and gets the privilege of wearing his first name on his bib. We have Lalisa de Sissa, who's won the Boston Marathon in the past, and he's been at the top of the world for about half a decade now. We have Kipchoge, who's run this race before. We have powerhouse Gabriel Guillet back at it. And we have a really exceptional runner, Connor Mance, who's an NCAA champion in the 10,000 meters. Now this guy, he looks like he's suffering all of the time. And so even early on in the race, it kind of looks like he's hurting. But this guy, don't let him fool you. You don't want to be running with him at the end of a race, because there's a very good chance he will just out push and out suffer and out kick you at the end. He's right up there with these guys in that initial pack. As the race unfolds, it's largely free of drama, and they go through the 10-mile mark at about 2:04:01 pace. Just about the fastest anybody's ever run on Boston, but not quite ready for a course record yet. They go through the 20K in 59:01, which is just a little bit short of the course record pace at that point. But again, these guys are running in the rain. It's about at this point that the weather starts to warm up just a little bit. And there's this thing in the distance running community where when you remove your hat, it's kind of like you're ready to go, watch out, and the hats are off here, so let's see what these guys can do. It's around the mile 17 mark where commentator Meb Keflezighi, the last American to win the Boston Marathon, what he says is that in training, most of what you're doing, 90% of it is physical and 10% is mental. But when it comes to race day, it's flip-flopped, and most of it is mental and only 10% of it is physical, and it's just the execution. Now we're getting into the difficult parts of this race here. We're approaching Heartbreak Hill, which is the infamous set of 3 hills that go up and up and up in Newton. and they kind of have the ability to zap you. And it's not because they're that difficult. I've run the Heartbreak hills before. They're not that big of hills, but they sure are. If you've only trained on the flat, that's not much of a problem for these guys. They know what they're getting into, but the problem is where it comes in the race. We're heading into about mile 18 or so, and then the placement of these hills really does open the field up most years, because anybody who can make a surge here or even just hold on to their pace really does drop other runners who find the increasing effort as they go up the hill. And so it's that iconic place in the race where moves can be made, and this is exactly what happened this year. Gabriel Guillet started to pick it up right around here. Now, this guy, he's won Lisbon Marathon 3 times, and he's won Ottawa as well. This guy really knows how to execute when it counts. And we have Career going right along with him. Now, Career's brother, Wesley Career, actually won the Boston Marathon in 2012. So between these two, they have a lot of experience, knowledge, and competency on this course. And it's at about an hour and a half into the race where Kipchoge isn't where we'd expect him to be. You'd think Kipchoge at this point would be up in the lead. He'd either be leading or drafting off of the leader, or at least in the lead pack. And he starts to drop off, and we find him moving back into about 7th place. Gabriel Guillet actually takes the lead, and they start pushing. Now at this point, we don't really know what's going on with Kipchoge. He looks mostly pretty good, and he's only back in 7th, but the problem is there's a time gap that's growing right now. And it's very difficult in an elite marathon to come back from a time gap, because the guys up front, they are really, even if some of them fall off the pace, the people who end up making it to the line first, they're going to be holding on to that pace. And Kipchoge is finding himself in a hard situation right now. So the race cuts to a commercial break, and Kipchoge is nowhere to be found. He's not on screen at all, and the commentators say that it seems like he's dropped out, but they can't confirm yet. Now, look, in the world of elite racing, sometimes runners just drop out, even if they're pushing their body to the brink, and when otherwise they would back off just a little bit, they can't afford to sometimes. They have to keep pushing, and sometimes it leads to them just flat out falling on the course, because these runners, they're really trying to stay at the front to be in contention to win. So the fact that in this race, with all the pressure on Kipchoge, that we see him falling off of the pack is very meaningful. Now, we don't know why, but when we come back from commercial break, it seems like he's just maybe out of the race. And as the commentators unfold, they find some footage, and it looks like what happened, check it out here, is that Kipchoge was going for his water bottle, and you can see that he misses his water bottle. And it really kind of slows him down a little bit. Now, missing one water bottle may not be the end of a race, but the way that these guys are running, they really do need every small advantage that they can get. And the nutrition, the hydration, and the calories, the special concoctions that they have in their bottles, those are no small potatoes. Those things are engineered for each athlete. They put a lot of money and time and research into this. And Kipchoge, maybe if he missed one bottle, he'd be okay, but we don't know. We don't know. Maybe he missed a couple bottles in a row. Maybe he was going through something, feeling something, and he really needed that bottle, and he missed it, and it was just another nail in the coffin from already feeling bad. We just know that it was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and he really fell off after missing that bottle. But Kipchoge really is the man. I have a lot of respect for this man because he didn't stop. He didn't quit. It seems almost impossible that he has any chance of winning this race or even making the podium, because he's several minutes back at this point, and with only a handful of miles to go, he's not likely to catch up with the leaders. But Kipchoge doesn't drop out. Now, it would be to his advantage to drop out, because he would save his legs from all the pounding, and he could just regroup and train for another race later on. So it's kind of an honorable thing to just keep going and just finish. But Kipchoge has said that he respects the distance. He doesn't believe he's invincible. And sometimes we as the public like to heighten these people to an invincible status and say that they're unbeatable, because it's kind of fun to say that until they're beat. Now, let's not count him out yet, but let's just look at where he is right now. He's a couple minutes off of the leaders. He's in 7th place before he dropped off. He missed his water bottle. Now he's back at it, but he's starting to go a little bit slower. Kipchoge's next 5K split is a 16:08. And for a guy who's running in the 15s, in the 14s, even for all of his 5K splits in his marathons, he's definitely fallen off of the pace. Now let's put this in perspective here. Kipchoge is essentially undefeated, essentially undefeated. He's only had 2 marathons where he hasn't won. And everything else, he's not only won, but he's normally dominated or set a world record or come across the line as the gold medalist at the Olympics. It's really quite incredible what this guy has done. He's very consistent, but he's human. He knows it. And I don't think that Kipchoge had an expectation that he was going to win. Now, I don't know, but Kipchoge doesn't seem to be the guy who has a big ego, who says, I'm going to win, let's do this, and you can't compete with me, even to himself. He has a humbleness about him. He has a soft grace about him. He is the king of mindset in distance running. In fact, when he talks about how he broke his second world record, the reporters asked him, how did you do it, Kipchoge? What's different from last year when you broke your world record? How'd you run 2 minutes faster? And he says, my training is the same. My coaching is the same. Now the thinking is different. So this guy is really a powerhouse at when things get difficult, pushing through. And when things are good, celebrating it and sharing it with others. He really runs for love, and he runs to really, I think this guy is really running to contribute to the consciousness of humanity. Now, maybe that's going beyond the scope of this video, but maybe not, because that's how he runs. He runs to give back. He runs for fulfillment. He runs for joy. He already has the world records, the gold medals, the respect, the notoriety, the fame, the course records. He wants to keep going, I'm sure, because he loves the passion. He loves the art of doing this. And for Kipchoge, it is an art of doing this. And so I believe that's why he continued to go on. Now, after this video comes out, we may have some press releases where Kipchoge says that there was something else. But he kept going. And as the race unfolds, it really becomes a 2-man race. Up front, it's Evans Chebet and Guillet, and they're duking it out. They drop everybody, including Kipruto. But then just a mile later, Kipruto comes back, and it's a 3-man race. This thing is off the hook. Who's going to make it to the finish line first? But back in the pack, we see Kipchoge back at it. He's in 7th place, and he actually ends up moving up just a little bit. But hot on his heels is the American Conor Mantz. Now, this guy I told you about at the beginning of our video here. He's NCAA 10K champion, and he is a beast. I'll tell you, he knows how to push. He reminds me a lot of Steve Prefontaine, who could just take a lot of pain. And now we see Conor Mantz coming up on Kipchoge. And we know that Kipchoge could be up ahead on another day at his best. So in no way am I going to think that Conor Mantz is a better runner than Kipchoge, but on any given day, any man can be beat. And don't you think that's a lot of motivation? It would be pretty cool to say that you beat Kipchoge. So Conor Mantz is gaining on him. Ultimately, when we get down to the thick of it, Conor Mantz does not beat Kipchoge. Kipchoge doesn't rally with a win, but he is able to hold on to a very respectable place. And as we get to the finish line, it is now Benson and Chebet duking it out. They duke it all the way to the finish line. The top 3 guys, they're so close, but Chebet is able to hold on and defend his title from the year before and cross the line in first place. What a race. Kipchoge finishes still strong. He's slower than he was going, but I'd say 6th place across the line is definitely a very respectable, very honorable finish for Eliud Kipchoge. Now, I want to bring this home to you here and share with you what I think's going on. When Kipchoge crossed the finish line, you see some runners, they really are suffering as they get right up to the last 100 meters to go and the face is all grimaced. They even fall down and cramp up, and it's very dramatic, especially at Boston. And sometimes you see them put their hands up or smile right as they go through the finish line, because that's this moment where your picture's being taken. You want to acknowledge that what you've just done. And then as soon as you cross the finish line, the smile goes away and it's back to, oh, everything hurts, you know? That's often the case. We see that even with elite runners. But with Kipchoge, he crossed the finish line, and afterward, where not everybody is watching him at that point, he smiles. There will be tabloids out there that say that the king is defeated or Kipchoge is done. And I don't agree with these whatsoever. Kipchoge is human. He's not a literal god, but that is exactly the point. With Kipchoge, he's transcended the difference between is he a god or is he a human? Because for Kipchoge, because he runs not just for himself, but he runs in his heart and he runs for contribution. with grace and joy. For these reasons, he's running for something that's bigger than the notoriety. And although I'm sure that Kipchoge wanted to win this race, I'm also sure, I'm calling it now, that Kipchoge is not going to be distraught by this. He may be disappointed. Sure, of course. But the expectation that others place on him, I really don't think gets to Kipchoge the way it can to some other runners, because Kipchoge is self-sufficient in a way. He's very secure, not just as a runner, but just as a human. And oftentimes the public doesn't really get it. And we see this when the reporters say to him, when he was going for the Breaking 2 at the Ineos project, he was asked at the press conference the day before, what happens if you don't win? If you don't do it, is there a plan B? And he sat there poised and he smiled and he didn't even entertain the question because he knew that they didn't understand that there is no plan B. He puts everything into every race that he has. He really shows up. I can feel the emotion moving even as I say it. He shows up to create a work of art. He doesn't show up just to win the race, collect the money. Of course, I don't think any runner is really just doing that, but they do succumb to the pressure sometimes. Kipchoge puts pressure on himself. That's why I know for sure that Kipchoge is not let down by this performance. Now we'll see what he says afterward, but mark my words. And it's telling on his face. The truth is told when he crosses the finish line, after the moment is done, when he has maybe no reason to be feeling good. He has every reason to be feeling good. He's still one of the greatest out there on the day. He still just ran this iconic race. He still ran it in under 2 hours and 10 minutes. He's still 6th place across the line. He contributed to a fantastic race where the better man won on the day. Kipchoge knows that. I hope you enjoyed our review of the Boston Marathon for 2023, at least for one man, Eliud Kipchoge. Now, before he towed the line, he was in Boston for a while, and he had press conferences, and he had interviews, and he had meet and greets, and he had events, a packed schedule. And we know when you're leading up to your peak race, you really do want to be taking it easy. Maybe you run, but when you're not running, you're kind of off your feet and you're relaxing. Now, I'm sure Kipchoge got some of that, but he also just had a lot of life to be dealing with. And this guy is almost rock star status. If you're in the running world, he is rock star status. I mean, go Kipchoge, right? Kipchoge's never run Boston before, and he's the talk of the town. He's the talk of the whole running world. He's spotlight front and center. Now, this is a lot for one man, but like I say, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't a lot for him. From our perspective, we held him up on a big pedestal, and he didn't really run as we thought he might. I thought he was going to win, sure. But there's always a lesson in all of this. Now, Kipchoge, I'm sure he'll find his own lessons here, but what can a lesson be for us? It can be that this sport is greater than just our performance on one day. It can be that any man can win on any given day. It can be that greatness is not in your finish time, and it could be who you become in the long term, because who's going to argue that Kipchoge is still the greatest of all time and still the best in the world right now? If there were a rematch on a different day, on a different course, with different temperatures, I'd still put my money on Kipchoge. He's not done. Not at all. I respect this man. I love this man. And thank you to everybody who put on such a great race, to the competitors today on the men's side, the women's side, the wheelchair side. We had time today to review just the men's side with a highlight on Kipchoge. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you want to learn more about running downhills, especially at Boston, we've got a special video on how to train the downhills so that your legs do not get beat up and you cross the finish line totally blown up, especially if you're going to run Boston. So check them out. I'll see you on the next video. Thank you for tuning in. Happy Marathon Monday.